Okay guys, I'm going to teach you how to bring this really triangulated mesh in from Marvelous Designer and make it into this beautiful, nice, retopologized mesh with animation. So go ahead and sit back and relax and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is export this out. If you have animation on your geometry, you will want to export it out a little bit different way, but typically if it's not going to animate and it's just going to be a static piece of geometry in Maya or whatever application you're bringing in, exporting out to an OBJ is just fine. However, if you do have animation on your geometry like I do here, you want to export it out as FBX if you're on Mac, or if you are on Windows, you have a variety of options like FBX or Alembic. But since we're on Mac, we'll go ahead and do FBX. And if you take a look here on the animation tab, you can see the animation having been applied, which this was created in another tutorial, which is down in the description of from Maya to Marvelous Designer and back. And in that tutorial, I walk you through how to take an animation from Maya, bring it into Marvelous Designer, create a garment that follows that animation, and then we bring it back into Maya. It's really a terrific tutorial. So now that we know we have animation and the file type we need to export out to, let's go ahead and jump back to the simulation. And go ahead and choose Export FBX. We'll go ahead and choose the file that I've already created, but you'll need to create your own and hit Save. We'll make sure that single object is checked, unweld, thin, animation, cache animation, and centimeters since we're working in centimeters, and hit OK. But since this tutorial is all about retopology, we'll want to export an additional file. This next file needs to be a flattened out version, so we'll go up here and reset the 2D arrangement. Then we'll go to File, Export, OBJ, name our file, deselect all avatars, and we'll want to make sure that you have the settings that I have here and hit OK. Now let's go to Maya. We're back in Maya, so let's start importing geometry. We'll go to File, Import, choose our curtains, FBX. And this next part is only if you have animation on your geometry. If you imported as a OBJ, you won't need to do this. So just choose your geometry, go to Cache, Geometry Cache, Import Cache, and then choose your folder. And we want to choose the XML file and hit Open. Okay, next we need to import our OBJ. However, before we do that, let's grab this geometry and put it on a layer. So we'll choose Layer, Create Layer from Selected, and then name the layer and hit Save, and then hide this geometry. Next, let's go ahead and import the OBJ. So go to File, Import, choose our OBJ, and import. As you can see, we have the flat versions of our curtains. So we'll select the curtains, and then we will separate them. Now that we've separated all of the geometry, let's bring over the UV editor. And this is where the power of Marvelous shines. You can see that I have the geometry selected, and in the UV editor is this perfect rectangular UV map. You can also note that the geometry is all triangles, which is not something good for animation. So we want to make this all quads to deform nicely. Now that we understand that we have UV maps already on our geometry, let's see how we can use that to our advantage. So let's take the UV editor and move it aside. And the first thing we want to do is create a plane. So go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and Plane. Because I'm using world scale, the primitive came in very small. So I want to go ahead and select it down here. And then before we do anything to that, we'll go to Deform and Lattice. In the channel box, you want to make sure to make the T divisions 2. Then let's zoom in to our plane. We'll show the outliner on the left and choose our lattice, and then right click near one of the edges to get our pop-up window and choose lattice point. From here, we can scale this plane using the scale manipulator. And now we'll go ahead and grab the end point and holding V, snap to our plane. And the same on the right, snapping to the edge of the plane. And then on the bottom, the same. Now, our plane encompasses the geometry from Marvelous, and we can see that it's right over that geometry. Next, let's hide our Marvelous geometry and hide selected, and then choose our plane. And let's turn on the wireframe. With our plane selected, we'll go to the inputs and choose polyplane 1. And here we can increase the subdivision. So we'll change it to something much larger, maybe 50. Because this is rectangular, we'll need to compensate. What we're trying to achieve is perfect squares. So doubling should suffice. So now that we have our nice mesh created, let's hold Command or Control and press D to duplicate. And as you can see in the outliner, there is a new plane, plane 4. That will be our plane for the Marvelous mesh in this location. However, we need to make more meshes for these additional. So let's choose the lattice and grab the point and follow the same process. Holding V, snapping. And we want to make sure that we are snapping to the very edge. Now, we'll choose the Marvelous mesh and hide selected. Now this mesh works, however, it has too much geometry and doesn't follow what we're looking for, which is perfect squares. So we'll go over to the polyplane in the channel box and we'll change the height to something like 10. And now we have perfect squares again. The reason we want that is because once we get the meshes onto the Marvelous mesh, we'll want to merge these together. And we have 100 edges here and 100 edges here. This next part really highlights how you make a garment in Marvelous Designer. In my case, I created this mesh and duplicated it to be down here. So this mesh and this mesh are the same. Knowing that, we can actually duplicate our new clean geometry and just place it up here. So I'll just go ahead and press Control or Command D to duplicate. And now I have plane 5. And I'll grab again plane 3 and I'll duplicate again. And then I'll zoom in and press D to move my pivot. And then snap it to this geometry. Now you can see I have the same scenario over here. So we'll just go ahead and grab the Marvelous geometry and hide it. Then we'll grab all of this geometry. I'll combine it and press D to move my pivot. And then with my pivot at the corner, I'll press Command or Control D to duplicate the group. Now we'll snap it to this mesh on the side. Now that we have all our clean geometry where it needs to be, let's go ahead and make sure to clear the transformations. But before we do that, we need to break up this back to separate pieces because right now it's combined. So I'm going to select the first combined geometry and I'm going to separate it. So now we have 3 different pieces here. And here, I will first hide the Marvelous geometry and then select the combined and separate. With all geometry selected, I'll make sure to clear my history and clear my transformations. Next, let's kind of clean up the outliner a little bit. So let's select all the geometry and hold Shift P to unparent. And then take the empty groups and this additional geometry and delete. So now we're left with the geometry outside of groups. Now, let's go ahead and show all geometry. And because we have the wall and the animated geometry on a layer, it does not show since the layer is hidden. And let's take this first piece of geometry here and take a look at our UV editor as well. As you can see, the geometry or the UV map is showing way down on this UV patch. But when we look at the Marvelous UV map, it's much larger. What we need to do is transfer the Marvelous UV to the new clean mesh. So to do that, we'll go ahead and find out which geometry pieces we have, which are Poly Surface 9 and Poly Surface 13. So we need to select the Marvelous geometry first and then the new clean geometry. And we'll go to Mesh, Transfer Attributes. We'll bring the window up, make sure to reset settings. And we want to make sure that our sample space is in World and hit Apply. As you can see, there was a change in the UV editor. And if we choose the new clean geometry, you can see that it has the same exact UV map as the Marvelous mesh does. But it's just now showing the clean quads. We need to repeat this process through all the other geometry. So let's do the same thing. 8 and 14, so we'll say 8 and 14 and apply. 7 and 15 and apply. 12 and 16. 11 and 17. And finally, 10 and 18. Now that we have everything transferred, we'll go ahead and select everything, close the UV editor, and clear history. With the history cleared and the UV maps transferred, now we can move on to transferring our new meshes to the posed Marvelous mesh. So let's go ahead and take the curtains that were flattened from Marvelous and just hide them for now. And let's go back to our curtains that were on the layer. And to make things a little easier to see, I'm going to hide this wall, hide selected. And if we look at UV editor again and look at our scene, you'll notice this mesh has this UV map, and then this mesh has this UV map as well. But first, I'm noticing that we need to separate this geometry, so we'll go to separate. So this piece looks like this piece. So what we need to do is go back and go to Mesh, Transfer Attributes again. And this time, we'll want to reset. And this time, we want to choose Vertex Position On and Sample Space UV. We'll select the Marvelous geometry and then hold Shift and select the new clean geometry and press Apply. Now, you can see that if I hide the Marvelous geometry, we have our beautiful new clean geometry right where it needs to be. So we can go ahead and repeat that process. However, before we move on, we need to make sure that our transformations are at 0. So let's go ahead and close these windows. And as we can see, our transformations are not at 0, so we need to go up to Freeze Transformations. And now we can see everything is at 0. With all transforms clear, let's go ahead and grab this mesh and then the new clean mesh. Go up to Mesh, Transfer Attributes, and make sure our settings are still correct. And hit Apply. And then let's hide these blocks. And continue the process. Choose Marvelous Mesh and then our mesh. Hit Apply. And the same. Now with everything selected, we'll clear our history and close the window. And now let's bring up the outliner and we can hide our Marvelous mesh. And now we have our great new clean geometry. Now, if we wanted to have this static mesh follow our animation. As a bonus, I'll go ahead and explain that. So what we need to do is go ahead and show all. And let's select the curtains that we separated from Marvelous. And let's just delete everything. And let's do the same with the flat mesh and kind of clean up the scene. And so we're left with just this clean mesh. And we can put this on a new layer and hide it. And then we'll go to File, Import, and then choose our FBX again. And then choose our geometry. Go to File or Cache and Import Cache and choose our folder and then the XML. So we have our animation again. Now, let's go ahead and hide this wall. Just make more room. And let's show our clean geometry. And if we select both the Marvelous geometry and the new clean geometry, we can see that it's polysurface 26 and polysurface 25. So we need to select the new clean geometry first, and then hold Control and select the Marvelous geometry. From there, we'll go to Deform and choose Wrap. From there, if you hide the curtains, you can see that the animation is then transferred to the new mesh, which follows the Marvelous triangulated mesh. And so quickly I'll do the additional pieces. Okay, so now if we hide the Marvelous mesh, show our wall, we can play our animation. And so that wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed this and found it informative. Please remember to follow, like, and share, and be sure to subscribe down below to get more great videos just like this.